In the shadow of a plantation mansion where secrets festered like wounds, 7-year-old Lila possessed a gift that would either save her family or destroy them all. Her perfect memory had captured every whispered prayer, every hidden document, every forbidden glance between her enslaved sister Miriam and the master's son Elias. But she had no idea that their forbidden love was about to ignite a scandal that would shake the foundations of everything they knew. When Thomas Carter discovered his son's treacherous heart and bellowed those damning words, "No son of mine marries a slave," he set in motion a chain of events that would expose buried lies, stolen freedom, and a dying woman's desperate act of conscience hidden in the very walls of his own home. What Lila found stitched inside an old quilt would either condemn them all to a life of bondage and separation, or reveal a truth so powerful it could break the chains that bound not just their bodies, but their souls. The storm was coming, and only a child's miraculous memory stood between love and destruction. If you're watching this incredible true story of courage and redemption, hit that subscribe button and tell me what city you're watching from, because this tale of forbidden love and miraculous justice needs to be heard around the world. The kitchen dog stopped barking. Miriam's hands worked the morning dough in steady rhythm, while steam rose from the iron pot, but it was Lila's voice that stilled the air. 7 years old and humming a hymn with pitch so perfect it seemed to call every living thing to listen. Even the rooster held his crow. Elias Carter paused in the doorway, heart struck by the quiet intimacy. Flour dusted Miriam's dark forearms. Her sleeves rolled back showed the strength that came from years of kneading bread for 40 mouths before dawn broke. But when she glanced toward him, her eyes held something gentle that made his chest tighten. "Morning, Master Elias." Cook Dinah called from the hearth. "Biscuits be ready shortly." He nodded but did not move, could not move. Not when Lila's song lifted the very air, and Miriam's steady hands shaped tomorrow's sustenance, and the morning light touched everything like a blessing he did not deserve. "Here," he stepped forward, pulling a strip of blue ribbon from his pocket. "For the flour to hold back your sleeve." The gesture carried more weight than thread could bear. Miriam's fingers trembled as she accepted it, and for a breath their hands nearly touched. The ribbon slipped from her wrist and landed on the flour-dusted table. "Seigneur, ayez pitié de nous," Lila whispered, her small voice carrying the French words like water over stone. Elias froze. Those words he had heard them before. Years ago, when his mother bent over her prayer book in the parlor, writing margin notes in careful script, notes no one else could read. Notes he thought were lost when fever took her. "Where did you hear that, little one?" Lila looked up from her humming, dark eyes wide and serious. "Miss Margaret used to say it when she thought nobody listening. Said it meant, 'Lord, have mercy.'" His throat tightened. Margaret had been dead 3 years. Lila could not have been more than 4 when his mother passed. Yet here were her exact words, her precise pronunciation, carried in the memory of a child who collected sounds like other children collected stones. "She remember everything she hear," Miriam said quietly. "Every word, every note. It a gift, I reckon, or a miracle." Elias studied Lila's solemn face and wondered what other memories lived behind those watching eyes. What other truths she might carry without knowing their weight. The kitchen bell rang for morning chores. Lila picked up the blue ribbon, holding it like something precious, and the moment shattered into ordinary time. But as Elias walked toward the fields, he felt the hymn following him, note by perfect note, carrying the scent of flour and the echo of his mother's prayer. "Lord, have mercy." Morning fog clung to the cypress knees like spirits reluctant to lift. The river moved thick and slow, dark water lapping against the wooden landing where Elias helped Miriam step over a twisted root. Her water jugs clinked softly as she found her footing. Lila hummed behind them, the same hymn from the kitchen, its verse echoing strange across the fog. Old Josiah, the stable hand, worked his way down the bank with careful steps, grey head bent over his own bucket. "Water's running muddy today," Josiah observed. "Might rain before evening," Elias barely heard. His attention fixed on Miriam's careful movements, the way morning light caught the edge of her cheek as she knelt to fill her jug. 3 years of shared glances and unspoken understanding weighed between them like a held breath. "Miriam," he whispered when Josiah moved upstream. His voice came rough, uncertain. "If ever there comes a day I may choose freely, I choose you." The words hung in the thick air, Miriam's hand stilled on the jug handle. When she looked up, her eyes held tears that would not fall. Master Elias. Not master. Not here. Just Elias. She trembled but said nothing. What words could answer such a promise? What hope could take root in ground so hard? Lila's humming stopped. Someone watching, she said, voice small but certain. Through the fog, a shadow moved. Overseer Brandt stepped into view, his pale eyes taking in the scene with calculation. Morning, Master Elias? Odd time for river visits. We needed water for the kitchen. Elias straightened, putting distance between himself and Miriam. Is there some problem? No problem. Just keeping watch, like your father pays me to do. Brandt's gaze lingered on Miriam, then shifted to Lila. Strange child, that one. Always listening to things that ain't there. Josiah's bucket scraped against stone as he stood. Best we head back. Chores won't wait. They gathered their vessels and turned toward Stott, the house. But behind them, the ferry pole knocked against the landing, steady, uneasy, like a warning no one could name. Elias felt it following them through the fog, tapping out a rhythm that matched his troubled heart. The mahogany desk gleamed under lamplight like a pool of dark water. Account books lay open across its surface, columns of numbers that told stories of debt and declining fortune. Elias stood before it, hat in hand, gathering courage he was not sure he possessed. You sent for me, sir. His father looked up from the ledgers, steel-grey eyes reflecting the lamp's glow. Sit down, boy. We have business to discuss. Elias remained standing. If it's about the lower field, it's about necessity. The older man's voice carried the weight of decision already made. I'm selling 3 of the house servants to Dalton's agent. The girl, Miriam, among them. They'll transport her south by week's end. The words hit like cold water. Sir? Cotton plantations in Alabama pay good prices for strong young women. Miriam's 20, healthy, can work house or field. Time to turn an asset into coin. She's not an asset. The words escaped before Elias could stop them. She's, what? His father leaned back, eyes narrowing. Property, boy. Same as the horses, same as the land. And property serves its owner's needs. Heat rose in Elias's chest. Mother would never have approved such a thing. Your mother is dead. I run this house now, and I'll not see it sink under debts while young fools moon over impossible notions. The older man stood, his bulk casting shadows across the room. You think I haven't seen how you look at that girl? Think I'm blind to what's brewing? Then you know I cannot let you sell her. Silence stretched between them, thick as river mud. When his father spoke again, his voice carried deadly quiet. Cannot? You forget yourself, boy. I've forgotten nothing. I remember Mother's teachings. I remember charity, mercy, the value of human souls. Human souls. The older man's laugh held no warmth. You plan to marry her, perhaps? Set up house with a slave girl, and whatever mongrel children follow? Elias lifted his chin. If that's what love demands. The slap came sharp across his face, echoing in the closed room. But worse than the sting was what followed his father's voice, loud enough to carry through the house, loud enough for servants in the hall to hear. No son of mine marries a slave. The quarters hummed with evening prayers when Lila slipped between the cabins, bare feet silent on packed earth. She found old Sarah by the fire, mending a torn quilt with patient stitches. Tell me about the hymn again, Lila whispered. The one about the hidden room. Sarah's ancient eyes lifted from her work. Child, why you keep asking about that old song? Because it means something. The words don't just talk about praising God. They talk about going places. Up the stairs, through the door, past the spinning wheel. Hymns always talk about going places, baby. Going to glory. Going home. No. Lila knelt by the fire, her small face serious. This one talks about real places. Like when it says climb the narrow stair where woolwork waits and seek the corner where the light falls thin. Those are real stairs, real corners. Sarah's hand stilled on the quilt. What makes you think so? Because Miss Margaret sang it sometimes when she thought nobody was listening. And after she sang it, she always went upstairs to the loom room, always to the same place. The old woman studied Lila's face in the firelight. Your sister know about these notions of yours? Miriam got troubles enough. They fixing to sell her south. Sarah's breath caught. Lord have mercy. That's what Miss Margaret used to say, in French. Seigneur, ayez pitié de nous. Lord, have mercy on us. Lila touched the blue ribbon tied around her wrist. Sarah, what if the hymn's not just about glory? What if it's about something else Miss Margaret hid? The old woman set down her needle. What you thinking, child? I'm thinking maybe we need to go see what's in that loom room. Maybe there's something Miss Margaret wanted folks to find, only she had to hide it where nobody would look. Sarah glanced around the quarters, then leaned closer. If such a thing exists, it would have to be powerful, important, dangerous, important. Everything's dangerous now, Leela whispered. But maybe dangerous and important is better than safe and lost. The house slept deep when Leela led Miriam and Josiah up the narrow servant stairs. Each step creaked a protest, but they moved careful as shadows, guided by the memory of a hymn. Third verse says, "Climb the narrow stair where woolwork waits," Lila whispered. This, the only narrow stair that leads to the loom room. Moonlight slanted through the attic window, casting everything in silver and black. The loom stood silent in the corner, its frame holding half-finished cloth. Shelves lined the walls, heavy with folded fabric and dusty trunks. "Where do we look?" Miriam asked. Leela closed her eyes, letting the hymn verse play in her memory. "Seek the corner where the light falls thin, behind the chest of wedding lace. There." She pointed to a trunk, pushed against the far wall. "Help me move it." The trunk scraped against the floor as they pushed it aside. Behind it, built into the wall's corner, stood a smaller chest bound with tarnished brass. Inside lay quilts wrapped in muslin, their patterns faded but their stitching still strong. "Where the dead leaves speak of living hope," Lila recited, running her small hands over the quilt bindings. "Where the needle wrote what the heart could not say." Her fingers found it a thickness in one quilt's edge that felt different from the others. Not batting. Something stiff and flat, sewn into the binding itself. "There's paper in here," she breathed. Josiah produced a small knife and cut careful stitches. The paper came free slowly, a single sheet, yellowed with age but intact. Words written in careful script, the ink faded but readable in the moonlight. Miriam's hands shook as she held it. "It's a manumission paper. Says here that Miriam, daughter of Rose, is to be freed upon the death of Margaret Carter." Her voice broke. "It's dated 3 months before Miss Margaret died. But it ain't signed," Josiah observed. "No," Lila whispered, studying the paper. "But look at the wax mark at the bottom. That's where her seal was supposed to go. She meant to finish it. Then, why didn't she?" "Because she died too sudden," Miriam said. "Fever took her fast. Maybe she never got the chance." Lila touched the unsigned line at the bottom. "Or maybe she did sign it, and somebody made this one to look like the real one weren't finished." They stared at each other in the moonlit room. Outside, a dog barked once and fell silent. "What do we do now?" Miriam asked. "We take it to the county clerk," Josiah said. "Let the law decide if it's legal." "And if the law says no?" Josiah's weathered face grew grim. "Then we pray Lila's hymn has more verses to sing." The county office smelled of ink and old leather, its walls lined with ledgers that held the records of birth, death, and ownership. Clerk Hensley looked up from his work as they entered, his pale eyes taking in the small group with surprise. "Josiah, what brings you here on a Tuesday morning?" "Got a paper needs examining, Mr. Hensley. Concerns the Carter family." Elias stepped forward, holding the document. "This was found among my late mother's belongings. It appears to be a manumission for Miriam here, dated before my mother's death." Hensley's eyebrows rose. He accepted the paper with careful hands, studying it in the lamplight. "The handwriting appears to be Mrs. Carter's, but see here, no signature, no seal. It's incomplete." "But the intent is clear," Elias said. "My mother meant to free Miriam upon her death. Intent doesn't make law, son. Without proper execution, this paper has no legal standing." Lila stepped closer to the desk, her small voice cutting through the room's tension. "There's another paper, isn't there?" Hensley's face went pale. "What do you mean, child? You keep looking at that cabinet like something in there bothers you. And your hands shake when you touch our paper, like you touched something similar recent." The clerk's Adam's apple bobbed. "I'm not sure what you're suggesting." "She's suggesting somebody brought you another paper about Miriam," Elias said, his voice sharp with understanding. "What did it say?" Hensley closed his eyes. A bill of sale came yesterday, properly signed and sealed. Declares Miriam property for life. No manumission possible. Who brought it? Overseer Brandt. Said, your father wanted it on record before. He stopped himself. Before what? Before you could make trouble about the sale. Lila moved around the desk, studying the cabinet where Hensley's eyes kept darting. Can we see this other paper? Child, it's not proper. Please. Miriam's voice carried quiet dignity. If my life is written on that paper, I have a right to see it. Hensley opened the cabinet with trembling hands and withdrew a document. It bore official seals and formal language, declaring Miriam the permanent property of Thomas Carter and his heirs. Lila leaned close, her dark eyes moving over the paper with intense focus. After a long moment, she looked up. This paper's wrong, she said quietly. What do you mean? The wax is wrong. Miss Margaret always used honey brown wax with gold flecks. This is red wax with black. And the F in the signature, it's got the wrong curl. Miss Margaret made her Fs with a little tail that curved left. This one curls right. Hensley stared at the child. You remember such details? I remember everything I see, and I saw Miss Margaret write her name 100 times. This isn't her hand. A cold silence filled the room. Outside, horses approached at a gallop. Mr. Hensley, Elias said carefully, what's the penalty for forging legal documents? Before the clerk could answer, the door burst open. Overseer Brandt filled the doorway, his face flushed with anger and fear. Give me that paper, he demanded, reaching for the false document. You got no right. Lila snatched it first, rolling it tight in her small hands. Why are you so worried about us seeing it if it's real? Brandt lunged forward, but Josiah stepped between them. Easy now, Mr. Brandt. Let's keep this civil. Civil? Brandt's voice cracked. That paper's worth more than all your lives put together. You hand it over, or what? Elias stepped forward, his young face hard with purpose. You'll forge another? Maybe steal the real seal this time? Brandt's eyes went wide with panic. He grabbed for the rolled paper in Lila's hands, tearing it in half before she could pull away. The pieces fluttered to the floor. Now you got nothing, he snarled. But Lila smiled, a small expression full of secret knowledge. We got enough. Thunder rumbled overhead as the first raindrops began to fall. The rain came sudden and hard, turning dust to mud and sending folk scrambling for cover. But Brandt did not seek shelter. He mounted his horse and spurred south toward the river, the torn pieces of the forged document clutched in his fist. He's running, Elias said, watching through the clerk's window. Let him go, Josiah advised. Storm will slow him down. But Lila shook her head, studying the torn halves on the floor. He's got Miss Margaret's real seal. That's how he made his mark look right. If he gets away with it, we can't prove nothing. What are you saying, child? I'm saying the hymn has more verses, and one of them talks about crossing water when the storm winds blow. Hensley looked between them, his face pale as parchment. What hymn? Lila began to hum, the melody rising clear above the sound of rain on the roof. The third verse goes, when waters rise and lightning calls, seek the crossing near the falls. Where the cypress stands in three, there the righteous soul goes free. That's directions, Miriam breathed. Real directions. To where? The old logging bridge, Josiah said. Only cypress grove with 3 trees standing together. But in this storm, it's the only way across the river before it floods, Elias finished. And if Brandt's heading for the river road, that's where he'll cross. Thunder crashed overhead, rattling the windows. In the distance, dogs began to howl. We need to follow him, Elias said. If he destroys that seal, if we go into this storm, we might all die, Josiah warned. Lila picked up the torn pieces of the forged document, smoothing them careful in her small hands. Better to die trying than live knowing we didn't. The stable was dark and full of nervous horses when they slipped inside. Rain drummed on the roof like scattered shot, and lightning painted everything in brief, harsh relief. Take the bay mare, Josiah whispered to Elias. She's steady in storms. Miriam and Lila can ride the old mule, he won't spook at thunder. They saddled quick and quiet, their movements watched by wide animal eyes. The barn cats huddled in the hay, sensing the danger that rode the wind. Which way? Elias asked, as they led the animals toward the door. Lila closed her eyes, letting the hymn play in her memory. Fourth verse says, "Follow where the lantern swings, past the place where the nightbird sings. The lantern at Miller's crossroads always swings in wind, and the nightbirds roost in the big oak there. That's the river road," Josiah confirmed. 2 hours hard ride in good weather. And tonight? Tonight, we trust in Providence and a little girl's perfect memory. They mounted and rode into the teeth of the storm. Rain lashed their faces, and wind tried to tear them from their saddles. But through it all, Lila hummed her hymn, each verse a map written in music, each line a step toward truth. The lantern swung wild in the wind, casting crazy shadows across the muddy crossroads. Lightning revealed the great oak, where nightbirds sheltered, its branches thrashing like desperate arms. "There," Lila pointed through the rain. "See the broken rail? That's where the hymn says to turn." The fence rail hung splintered, probably from a wagon taking the corner too fast in the dark. Beyond it, a muddy track led down toward the river bottom. "Fresh horse tracks," Josiah observed, leaning from his saddle. "Brant came this way, sure enough." They followed the trail as it wound between stands of pine and poplar. The storm grew worse, turning the track to soup that grabbed at their animals' hooves. But Lila's voice rose steady above the wind, singing them forward. "Where the willows bend and the waters flow, there the truth that's hidden will surely show." "How much farther?" Elias called over the thunder. "Not far. The bridge is just past the next bend." But when they rounded the curve, they found more than they bargained for. Brant's horse stood riderless by the water, reins trailing in the mud. And from the riverbank came the sound of a man cursing the dark. The river ran high and angry, carrying branches and debris in its swift current. The old logging bridge, usually 3 feet above the water, now stood with its boards awash. Brant stood knee-deep in the shallows, fishing in the mud for something lost. His curses carried clear over the storm's noise. "He dropped something," Miriam whispered. "The seal," Lila said with certainty. "It fell in the water when his horse spooked at the lightning." They watched from the tree line as Brant waded deeper, desperate hands searching the murky bottom. Each step took him further into danger as the current pulled at his legs. "He can't swim," Josiah observed. "Seen him around water before always stays clear of the deep parts." "Then why's he risking it?" "Because he knows what happens to overseers who steal from their masters," Elias said grimly. "Father's not known for mercy with thieves." Lightning crashed close by, turning the water silver. In its brief light, they saw Brant stumble, arms windmilling as the current caught him. He went under with a splash. "Lord help us," Miriam breathed. When Brant surfaced, coughing river water, his hand clutched something small and dark. The seal. He'd found it. But finding and keeping were different things. The current carried him toward the bridge, and his panicked thrashing made rescue impossible. "We have to help him," Elias said, moving toward the water. Josiah caught his arm. "Boy, that river will take you too. We can't just watch him drown." "You can," Lila said quietly. "But I can't." Before anyone could stop her, the child slipped from the mule and ran toward the bridge. Her bare feet found purchase on the wet boards, and her voice rose clear above the storm. She was humming again, but this time the melody was different, slower, steadier, like a heartbeat in the chaos, and somehow, impossible as it seemed, the sound carried. Brant's panic eased, his thrashing stopped. Following the sound of Lila's voice, he managed to grab a bridge post and pull himself toward the bank. "How did?" Elias began. "Music calms things," Josiah said with wonder. "Animals, people, storms. That child's got a gift that goes deeper than memory." They pulled Brant from the river more dead than alive, water streaming from his clothes and hair. The seal had cut his palm when he clutched it, leaving blood mixed with river mud on his shaking hands. "The paper," he gasped. "Where's the paper?" "Safe," Lila said. "But it don't matter now. We know what you done." Brant's wild eyes fixed on her small face. "You don't know nothing, child. Nothing at all. I know you stole Miss Margaret's seal. I know you forged her name on a lie. And I know the real manumission is somewhere you can't reach it. The real—" Brant stopped himself, but too late. "There is a real one," Elias said, understanding flooding his voice. "Where is it?" Brant tried to stand and failed, his legs too weak from the cold water. "In my satchel. But you'll never—" "Where's the satchel?" Josiah demanded. Leela was already moving, following some inner compass toward a stand of cypress knees. The storm had blown debris everywhere, but her sharp eyes found what they sought, a leather satchel wedged between two roots, half buried in mud. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, lay papers. The real manumission, properly signed and sealed with honey-brown wax. Bills of sale that showed Miriam's mother sold away years ago. And at the bottom, a letter in feminine handwriting. "It's from Miss Margaret," Miriam whispered, her voice breaking. "To me." The letter was brief but clear. Margaret Carter had grown to doubt the righteousness of slavery. She had planned to free several families, starting with Miriam's. But illness came too soon, and she could only finish the one document before fever took her. She hid it in her own seal wax, Lila realized. That's why Brant needed the real seal to melt it down and use the wax for his forgery. But why didn't he just destroy the real paper? Because he needed to copy Miss Margaret's handwriting exact. The real one was his model. Brant struggled to his knees, his face pale with more than cold. "You don't understand. Mr. Carter will kill me if he finds out. Then you should have thought of that before you decided to play with other folks' lives," Josiah said, without sympathy. The old logging bridge groaned under the weight of wind and rising water. What had been a simple crossing an hour ago now looked like a gateway to death. "We can't cross here," Elias said, studying the swaying structure. "Not in this storm." But Lila hummed another verse, her small voice cutting through the wind. "When the bridge of man fails to bear the load, trust the path that the Spirit showed." "What's that mean?" "Means there's another way," she said with certainty. "The hymn talks about a crossing where the 3 trees stand. This bridge is wrong. Then where? Follow me." She led them upstream, her bare feet sure on the muddy bank despite the darkness. The storm showed no sign of lessening, but her voice never wavered as she sang them forward. "There," she pointed through the rain. 3 cypress trees, just like the verse said. The trees stood in a line across the swollen creek, their massive trunks creating natural stepping stones. Water swirled around their bases, but their roots ran deep enough to hold against the current. "It's still dangerous," Josiah warned. "Everything's dangerous now," Miriam said, echoing her sister's earlier words. "But dangerous and moving is better than safe and drowning." They crossed one by one, using the trees as anchors and trusting their lives to ancient cypress wisdom. Lila went last, her small form nearly lost in the storm's fury. But her voice never stopped, guiding them with melody when sight failed. When they reached the far bank, Brant was unconscious from cold and exhaustion. They loaded him onto Josiah's horse and continued toward town, carrying truth in a muddy satchel and hope in a child's perfect memory. The storm began to break as they crested the hill above the settlement. In the distance, lamplight flickered in windows and the sound of church bells carried on the wind. Dawn was still hours away, but already the darkness felt less complete. Ruth's cabin sat at the edge of town, smoke rising steady from its chimney despite the storm. She opened the door before they could knock, as if she'd been expecting them. "Lord have mercy," she breathed, taking in their bedraggled state. "Get in here before you catch your death." The cabin was small but warm, herbs hanging from the rafters and a pot of something fragrant bubbling on the stove. Ruth bustled between them with practiced efficiency, pressing hot tea into their hands and wrapping Brant's unconscious form in dry blankets. "What's happened?" she asked as she worked. "Found the truth," Lila said simply, "and it's bigger than we thought." Ruth's skilled hands checked Brant's pulse and breathing. "He'll live, though he might wish otherwise when he wakes." "What truth you talking about, child?" Miriam showed her the papers from the satchel, the real manumission, the forged documents, the letter from Margaret Carter. Ruth read them by lamplight, her weathered face growing grave. "This changes everything," she said finally. "If this paper's real—" "It's real," Lila interrupted. "I can tell by the wax, the handwriting, even the way the ink dried. Miss Margaret wrote this with her own hand. Then Miriam's been free for 3 years, and nobody knew it." "Somebody knew it," Elias said, glancing at the still unconscious overseer. "And somebody tried to make sure it stayed buried." Ruth set down the papers and fixed them all with a stern look. "You understand what this means? If word gets out that Thomas Carter's been holding a free woman in bondage, It'll destroy him. Men have been shot for less. Then what do? We take it to the authorities. Let the law decide. What if the law won't listen? What if they side with Mr. Carter because he's got money and influence? Ruth's eyes found Lila's small, serious face. Then we trust that little girl's gifts will show us another way. Outside, the storm finally broke into scattered rain, but none of them felt much like celebrating. The hardest part still lay ahead. Morning brought weak sunlight and the news that Clerk Hensley had returned from the county seat. They found him in his office, looking haggard and nervous as he sorted through official papers. "Mr. Hensley," Elias began, but the man cut him off with a raised hand. "I know why you're here. Word travels fast in a town this size." He glanced around the office as if checking for listeners. "But I can't help you. Can't, or won't, can't." Orders came down from the county judge. Any disputes involving the Carter family are to be referred to Charleston. No local judgments. Miriam stepped forward, her dignity intact despite her worn clothes. "Sir, I'm asking for nothing but what the law allows. If I'm free, I have a right to know it." "Show him the paper," Lila said quietly. Hensley accepted the manumission with trembling hands, studying it in the morning light. His face grew paler with each word he read. "This appears genuine," he admitted. "The signature, the seal, the handwriting, all consistent with Mrs. Carter's other documents. Then declare it legal and be done with it." "I can't," Hensley's voice cracked with strain. "Another paper arrived this morning. From Thomas Carter himself. Claims this document is a forgery and that he has evidence of tampering with official records." "What evidence?" "His overseer's testimony. Says you stole his seal and forged the whole thing." Lila stepped closer to the desk, her dark eyes fixed on the clerk's face. "Mr. Hensley, you got children?" "2 daughters." "Why?" "Because I want you to look at me when you answer this question. Look at me and tell me if you think I could forge Miss Margaret's handwriting." Hensley stared into the child's solemn face, seeing innocence so pure it hurt to witness. "No," he whispered. "I don't believe you could." "Then why are you letting a grown man's lies overrule a child's truth?" Before he could answer, heavy footsteps sounded on the office porch. Through the window, they saw Thomas Carter himself approaching, flanked by 2 men with guns. "Because some truths are too dangerous to speak," Hensley said, fear plain in his voice. The door opened without a knock, and Thomas Carter filled the frame. His eyes found the papers on the desk and his face darkened with rage. "I believe you have something that belongs to me." Thomas Carter had aged years in the past day. His hair hung disheveled, his usually pristine clothes wrinkled and stained, but his eyes still held the cold authority of a man accustomed to absolute obedience. "Elias," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "Come here." "No, sir." The word hung in the air like a challenge. The 2 armed men behind Carter shifted nervously, hands moving toward their weapons. "You forget yourself, boy. I remember myself perfectly. I remember what Mother taught me about right and wrong. I remember her prayers for the day when all God's children would be free. Your mother was a foolish woman who filled your head with dangerous nonsense." Lila stepped forward, her small form somehow commanding attention despite her size. "She wasn't foolish. She was faithful, and she signed that paper because she knew it was right." Carter's gaze dropped to the child, and something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or fear. "You're the one they say remembers everything." "Yes, sir." "Then remember this." He leaned down until his face was level with hers. "I am master here. My word is law, and my word says this paper is a lie. Then your word is wrong." Lila's voice never wavered. "Because I remember when Miss Margaret signed it. I remember her praying over it. I remember her crying when she sealed it, because she knew it wouldn't be enough to save everybody. You were 4 years old. I was old enough to see truth, old enough to remember it, old enough to sing it back when folks need to hear it." Carter straightened, his face flushed with anger. "Hensley, destroy that paper. Now." The clerk's hands shook as he reached for the manumission. "Sir, I'm not sure I have authority. You have my authority. That's all you need." But before Hensley could touch the document, Lila began to hum. The melody rose sweet and clear in the tense room, and somehow it made everyone pause. Even Carter's armed men lowered their weapons slightly, as if the music had cast a spell. "That's the hymn," Miriam breathed. The one that led us to the truth. What him? Carter demanded. Lila's humming grew stronger, and words began to emerge. Seek the corner where the light falls thin, behind the chest of wedding lace. Where the dead leaves speak of living hope, where the needle wrote what the heart could not say. Carter's face went white as parchment. How do you know those words? Because Miss Margaret sang them when she thought nobody was listening. Because they're not just about finding her sewing room, they're about finding her conscience. Margaret she never told you, but she told her quilts, she told her prayers, she told her hymns. And her hymns told me. Carter swayed on his feet, one hand clutching his chest. The color had drained completely from his face, and his breathing came in short gasps. "Sir?" one of his men asked. "You all right?" But Thomas Carter was not all right. Years of rage and guilt and suppressed knowledge crashed down on him like a falling tree. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his heart as if it might burst from his chest. "Help him," Miriam said, moving toward the fallen man. "Stay back," one of the gunmen warned. But Lila was already kneeling beside Carter, her small hands finding his wrist. "Breathe slow," she instructed, her voice gentle as a mother's. "In and out, like the babies when they're born. In and out." Incredibly, Carter's breathing began to steady. The panic in his eyes faded to confusion, then to something that might have been recognition. "How did you?" "Miss Ruth taught me, for when folks get too scared to breathe right." Lila's dark eyes met his. "You've been scared a long time, haven't you, Mr. Carter?" And for the first time in years, Thomas Carter told the truth. "Yes," he whispered. "Yes, I have." Thomas Carter sat on the office floor, his back against the wall and his face the color of old ash. The fight had gone out of him, leaving behind something smaller and more human than anyone had seen in years. "She knew," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Margaret knew what I was, what I'd become." Elias knelt beside his father, concern overriding their conflict. "What are you talking about?" "Your mother," she tried to tell me, near the end, tried to make me see that what we were doing, what I was doing, was wrong. Carter's eyes found the manumission papers lying on Hensley's desk. "She wrote that, didn't she? As a mercy?" "Yes," Lila said simply. "She wrote it because love is stronger than law." Carter laughed, a sound bitter as winter wind. "Love. I thought love was keeping you safe, keeping our name respected, keeping our land profitable. I thought love was—" He stopped himself, shaking his head. "What changed?" Miriam asked, her voice gentle despite everything he'd put her through. "You did, all of you, watching Elias these past months, seeing how he looked at you, seeing something in his eyes I'd forgotten existed." Carter struggled to his feet, leaning heavily on the wall. "Margaret had that same look, at the end. Like she could see something I was blind to. Father." "No." Carter held up a trembling hand. "Let me finish. I found something else, after Margaret died. A ring she'd hidden, wrapped in one of her prayers. It was too small for my hand, too large for hers." His voice caught. It was meant for someone else. Someone she hoped would be free to wear it someday. The room fell silent except for the sound of Carter's labored breathing. "I burned it," he continued. "Threw it in the fire and watched it melt, because I couldn't bear what it meant. But the prayer, I kept the prayer. Carried it in my pocket like a stone, reminding me of what I'd become." He reached into his vest and withdrew a folded paper, yellow with age and worn soft from handling. "She wrote your name, Miriam, wrote it over and over, like a charm, like she was trying to make something true by willing it into being." Miriam accepted the paper with tears in her eyes. Her own name filled the page, written in Margaret Carter's careful script, surrounded by prayers for forgiveness and freedom. "Why are you telling us this?" Elias asked. "Because I'm tired," his father said. "Tired of carrying lies, tired of pretending that owning people doesn't kill your soul by inches. Tired of fighting a war I lost the day I chose pride over love." He straightened with effort, some of his old authority returning. "Hensley, declare that manumission valid. Do it now, before I lose what little courage remains." Word spread through the town like wildfire. By noon, a crowd had gathered on the courthouse steps, planters and farmers, townspeople and travelers, all drawn by rumors of something unprecedented happening in their quiet settlement. Thomas Carter sat in a chair on the porch, still pale but determined. Beside him stood Elias and Miriam, their hands clasped despite the watching eyes. Lila perched on the steps, the precious documents in her lap, humming softly to herself. Clerk Hensley emerged from the courthouse carrying his official seal and a thick ledger. His hands shook as he set up his writing table in full view of the crowd. "What's this about?" Someone called from the back. "Freedom," Lila answered before anyone could stop her. "Freedom that was stolen and hidden, but now it's found." A murmur ran through the gathering. Several men pushed closer, their faces hard with suspicion. "You can't free a slave without proper compensation," one declared. "It's against the law." "No law was broken," Hensley said, his voice growing stronger. "This document predates any sale. Miriam was legally freed 3 years ago, only the paperwork was misfiled." "Misfiled?" The man's voice turned ugly. "Or hidden by abolition sympathizers?" "Hidden by a dying woman's conscience," Thomas Carter said, his voice carrying across the crowd. "Hidden by my wife, God rest her soul, who saw truth more clearly than her husband." The crowd buzzed with confusion and anger. Several men began arguing among themselves, their voices rising toward violence. Then Lila began to sing. Her voice rose clear and pure above the chaos, carrying the hymn that had guided them through darkness. The melody was simple, but something in her perfect pitch made it impossible to ignore. "Climb the narrow stair where woolwork waits," she sang. "Seek the corner where the light falls thin, behind the chest of wedding lace, where the needle wrote what the heart could not say." "What's she singing about?" someone asked. "History," Elias answered. "She's singing about the truth we found hidden in my mother's sewing room. The truth that says love is stronger than law, mercy greater than money." "Pretty words," a voice called from the crowd. "But this is about property, boy. About rights and ownership." "No," Miriam said, standing tall despite her fear. "It's about recognizing that some rights are given by God, not granted by government." A preacher pushed through the crowd, his Bible clutched in weathered hands. "What does the law say, Hensley? Not what we wish it said, but what it actually says." Hensley opened his ledger with shaking hands. "The law says a valid manumission, properly executed before the owner's death, takes precedence over any subsequent document. And this," he held up the honey-colored wax seal. "This seal belonged to Margaret Carter. No one else could have used it legally. How do we know it's real?" "Because I remember," Lila said simply. "I remember watching Miss Margaret seal her letters with that exact wax. I remember the color, the smell, even the way she pressed it down with her thumb." She stood and walked to the clerk's table. "Look here, you can still see her thumbprint in the wax." The crowd pressed closer as Hensley examined the seal under a magnifying glass. After a long moment he looked up. "The child is right. This bears Margaret Carter's thumbprint, clear as day. And the signature? Genuine. I've seen enough of Mrs. Carter's writing to be certain." A heavy silence fell over the gathering. In the distance, a church bell tolled the hour. "Then what are we waiting for?" the preacher asked. "If the law is clear, let justice be done." Hensley dipped his pen in the inkwell with ceremony befitting the moment. The crowd watched in absolute silence as he added his signature to the manumission, certifying it as legally valid. "Miriam, daughter of Rose," he read aloud, "is hereby declared a free woman under the law of South Carolina, with all rights and privileges pertaining thereto." He pressed his official seal into warm wax, making the document complete. When he lifted the seal, a perfect impression remained, the emblem of legal freedom that no one could dispute. "It is done," he announced. Miriam swayed on her feet, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened. 3 years of bondage officially ended with the press of a seal. But before anyone could celebrate, Overseer Brandt pushed through the crowd, his clothes still damp from his river adventure and his face twisted with rage. "You can't do this," he shouted. "That girl tried to escape. She's a runaway. Where's your evidence?" Hensley demanded. "I saw her heading for the river in the storm, saw them all running like fugitives." "We weren't running away," Lila said, her clear voice cutting through Brandt's accusations. "We were running toward truth, toward justice, toward the light Miss Margaret left burning for folks who were brave enough to see it." "The child speaks wisdom," the preacher said. "Sometimes what looks like flight is actually pursuit of righteousness." Brant's face grew desperate. "You don't understand. This will ruin everything. The debt, the contracts, the lies," Thomas Carter finished, standing with effort. "The lies we told ourselves to make wrong seem right." He faced the crowd, his voice carrying the weight of years. "My overseer speaks truth about one thing. This will change everything. But maybe everything needs changing." He walked to where Miriam stood and, before the watching crowd, extended his hand. "I ask your forgiveness, child. For the years stolen, the dignity denied, the freedom delayed." Miriam looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then, with grace that shamed them all, she took it. "Forgiveness is God's business," she said. "I'm just grateful to be free to choose my own path forward." Applause rippled through the crowd, tentative at first, then growing stronger as the reality settled in. They had witnessed something rare and precious, the voluntary release of power, the confession of wrong, the triumph of conscience over custom. "If there are no further objections," the preacher said, stepping forward with his Bible, "I believe we have some unfinished business to address." Elias looked at Miriam, a question in his eyes. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Dearly beloved," the preacher began, "we are gathered in the sight of God and this community to witness the joining of two hearts that have already been united by love." "You can't marry them," someone protested. "It's not proper." "She's free now," the preacher replied calmly. "Free to choose her own husband, free to make her own vows, free to build her own life. And if she chooses to build it with this young man, that's between them and the Almighty." Elias took Miriam's hands in his, their fingers intertwining like the threads of a tapestry long in the making. "I vow before God and these witnesses that I choose you, Miriam, not because I can, but because I cannot imagine choosing anyone else." Miriam's voice came soft but clear. "And I choose you, Elias, not as property to owner, not as servant to master, but as woman to man, equal in the eyes of the Lord." The preacher smiled, opening his Bible to a page marked with a faded ribbon. "By the authority vested in me by God and the state of South Carolina, I now pronounce you husband and wife." They kissed, then, gentle and reverent, while the crowd watched in wonder. Even those who had objected seemed moved by the simple dignity of the moment. Lila stepped forward, the blue ribbon from the kitchen still tied around her wrist. She untied it carefully and wrapped it around the joined hands of her sister and new brother-in-law. "Now you're bound by love instead of law," she said. "And love don't never break." As evening approached, the crowd began to disperse, taking with them stories that would be told for generations. But a small group remained on the courthouse steps: Elias and Miriam, Leela and Josiah, Thomas Carter and the preacher. "What happens now?" Carter asked, his voice subdued. "Now we figure out how to live with what we've learned," Elias replied. "About justice, about mercy, about the price of doing right. The plantation will need new management, new principles." Elias looked at his father steadily. "I won't run it as it was. I can't." Carter nodded slowly. "Perhaps it's time for change. Perhaps it's past time." "What about the others?" Miriam asked. "The other families still in bondage?" "One step at a time," the preacher counseled. "Today's victory is tomorrow's foundation. Let the word spread that freedom is possible, that conscience can triumph over custom." Lila had been quiet through this conversation, but now she spoke up. "Miss Margaret left other things hidden, other papers, other truths. I can remember where they are, if folks want to look." "Papers about more manumissions?" Carter asked. "Papers about lots of things. Plans, hopes, dreams of a different world." Lila's dark eyes held wisdom beyond her years. She never gave up believing things could change. Even when she was dying, she kept writing, kept planning, kept hoping. "Then we'll look," Elias decided. "We'll find whatever she left and honor her intentions." "And if it ruins you financially," Carter asked, "then I'll be poor but free. And that's better than rich and enslaved to a system I know is wrong." The old man smiled for the first time in years. "Your mother would be proud." As they prepared to leave, Lila pulled the freedom papers from her dress and smoothed them carefully. The ribbon lay across the official seal like a blessing. "I'm going to keep this safe," she announced. "All of it. The papers, the ribbon, the memory of this day. For when the babies come and need to know their history." "What babies?" Miriam asked. Lila grinned, suddenly looking every bit of her 7 years. The ones that's coming? The free ones? The ones who'll grow up hearing stories about the day their mama sang her way to freedom. A month later, the old Carter plantation looked much the same from the outside. The same fields stretched toward the river, the same buildings housed the same families, but everything felt different, as if the very air had changed its composition. Elias and Miriam lived in the big house now, working together to transform it from a symbol of oppression into something approaching home. Thomas Carter had taken a small room in the overseer's cottage, claiming he preferred the simpler space. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Several families had chosen to leave, seeking opportunities in northern cities or western territories. Others stayed, negotiating fair wages and working conditions for the first time in their lives. Lila had become the plantation's unofficial record keeper, her perfect memory preserving contracts, agreements, and the details of each family's new status. She carried her blue ribbon everywhere, tying it around important papers as a sign of their significance. More letters came today, she announced, entering the parlor where Elias worked over the account books. Letters from other places, other plantations. Word spread about what happened here. She handed him a stack of correspondence, her small face serious. Some folks want to know how we did it. Others want to know if we can help them do the same. Elias read through the letters, his expression growing more thoughtful with each page. They're asking us to share what we learned, to help other families find freedom. Are we going to? I think we have to. Mother's dream wasn't just about one family, one plantation. It was about something larger. Miriam entered the room, flower on her apron, and a question in her eyes. What's something larger? The future, Lila said before Elias could answer. The one Miss Margaret saw in her prayers. The one where all God's children get to choose their own path. That's a big dream for a little girl. I'm not little anymore, Lila replied with dignity. I'm 7 3/4, and I've seen what happens when folks have courage to do what's right instead of what's easy. She walked to the window, where late afternoon sunlight painted everything gold. In the distance, children played in the quarters, free children now, their laughter carrying on the wind like a song of promise. Besides, she added, I remember what Miss Margaret used to say when she thought nobody was listening. What was that? Lila turned back to them, her dark eyes bright with inherited wisdom. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. She read it in a book once, and it stuck in her heart like honey sticks to a spoon. And you think it's true? I think Miss Margaret was right about most things. I think justice is like water, it always finds a way through, even when folks try to dam it up. She touched the ribbon around her wrist, and I think we just helped it flow a little freer in this particular place. Outside, the evening bell rang across the fields. But for the first time in years, it rang not as a summons to bondage, but as a call to community, a reminder that another day of freedom had passed, and another was coming with the dawn. As the last light faded from the western sky, Lila began to hum her hymn again, but now it carried no secrets, no hidden directions to freedom. Now it was simply what hymns were meant to be, a song of thanksgiving, rising to heaven on the breath of those who had learned to hope. And in that small corner of South Carolina, hope was enough to light the way forward. Spring brought more than wildflowers to the Carter place. It brought visitors, some curious, some hostile, most simply amazed by stories that seemed too remarkable to be true. The first was a newspaper correspondent from Charleston, a thin man with ink-stained fingers who spent 3 days interviewing everyone from Thomas Carter to the youngest field hand. He left with pages of notes and a promise to tell the true story to readers across the state. The second was a federal marshal, stern-faced and suspicious, investigating reports of irregular manumissions and possible violations of state law. He departed satisfied that all documents were legal and properly executed, though clearly puzzled by the voluntary nature of the arrangements. The third visitor was different. She arrived on a Tuesday morning in a simple wagon, her grey hair neatly pinned and her dark dress marking her as someone in mourning. But her eyes held no sadness, only a fierce intelligence that reminded everyone of someone they couldn't quite place. I'm Elizabeth Grimke, she announced from the parlor doorway. Margaret Carter was my cousin. Silence fell like a curtain. Even Lila stopped her humming to stare at this unexpected relative. "Cousin?" Elias managed. "Second cousin, actually. Margaret and I corresponded for years, though discreetly. She wrote to me about her concerns regarding the family business." Elizabeth's gaze swept the room, taking in the mixed gathering of black and white faces. "I see she found a way to act on those concerns. You knew about Mother's plans?" "I knew she was troubled. I knew she had stopped sleeping well, stopped eating regularly. I knew she was searching for some way to reconcile her faith with her circumstances." Elizabeth pulled a letter from her reticule. "This came to me 3 days before she died. Never mailed, but found among her things." The letter was brief but devastating in its clarity. "Dearest cousin, by the time you read this, I hope my courage will have proven equal to my convictions. I cannot continue to own human souls while claiming to follow Christ. I cannot pass this burden to my son. I have found a way to begin setting things right, though I fear it will not be enough. If I do not live to see the result, please pray that Providence will guide others to complete what I could only start. Your devoted cousin, Margaret." "She never sent it," Elizabeth continued, "but she never threw it away either. I think she hoped someone would find it eventually, someone who would understand what she was trying to do." "And do you understand?" Miriam asked quietly. "I understand that Margaret died trying to live by her principles instead of her prejudices. I understand that you all have somehow managed to honor her intentions in ways she probably never imagined possible." Elizabeth looked directly at Lila. "And I understand that this child carries something precious, not just perfect memory, but perfect faith." Lila blushed under the attention. "I just remember what folks tell me. You remember what matters. That's a rarer gift than you know." Elizabeth Grimke stayed for 2 weeks, and when she left, she took with her detailed plans for something unprecedented, a school where black and white children would learn together. "It won't be easy," she warned. "There will be opposition, probably violence. But Margaret always believed that education was the key to real freedom." The school opened in the old tobacco barn, cleaned and converted with benches and blackboards. Lila became its first student teacher, her extraordinary memory making her ideal for helping younger children with their lessons. "Read it back to me," she would say, pointing to a line of text. "Every word, every punctuation mark. Memory is like a muscle. It gets stronger when you use it." The children loved her patient instruction, and even the adults began stopping by to learn their letters. Miriam taught arithmetic, while Elias handled history and geography. Thomas Carter, to everyone's surprise, proved gifted at teaching Latin, a skill left over from his own privileged education. "Why Latin?" someone asked. "Because it's the language of law and medicine," he replied. "And if we're going to change this world, we need people who understand how it works." Opposition came, as Elizabeth had predicted. Anonymous threats arrived weekly. Windows were broken twice. Once, someone set fire to the woodshed, though the flames were discovered and doused before spreading. But for every act of hostility, there were 2 of support. Families sent their children from neighboring counties. A Quaker meeting in Philadelphia sent books and supplies. Even some of the local white families began enrolling their children, drawn by the school's reputation for excellent instruction. "It's working," Miriam said one evening, as they watched students of all ages walking home together, their books tucked under their arms like treasures. "For now," Elias replied, "but we need to be prepared for stronger opposition. Change this fundamental doesn't come without a fight." He was right. The fight was coming, though none of them could have predicted the form it would take. The challenge came not from angry neighbors or hostile authorities, but from an unexpected source: success itself. Word of the Carter plantation's transformation had spread far enough to reach the attention of a wealthy Charleston planter named Harrison Caldwell. He arrived in early summer with an entourage of advisors and a proposition that was as generous as it was suspicious. "I'll buy the entire property," he announced over dinner. "Pay triple its assessed value, enough for you to relocate anywhere you choose, start fresh without the complications of local history." "Why would you pay so much?" Elias asked. "Because I believe in your experiment. I want to expand it, create a model community that can be replicated across the South." Caldwell's smile was warm, his manner sincere. "Think of it, Elias. Instead of one small school, we could have dozens. Instead of one transformed plantation, We could have hundreds. It was an appealing vision, and Caldwell's credentials seemed solid. He had connections in Washington, friends in the abolition movement, backing from northern investors interested in progressive agriculture. But something bothered Lila about the man. She couldn't pinpoint what exactly. He was polite to everyone, spoke respectfully to the freed families, even complimented her on her remarkable memory. Yet something in his manner set her teeth on edge. "What do you think?" Miriam asked her sister privately. "I think he smiles too much, and his eyes don't match his words." "What do you mean?" "When he talks about helping folks, his mouth smiles but his eyes count things, like he's adding up numbers instead of thinking about people." It was Josiah who uncovered the truth. His nephew worked in Charleston as a stable hand, and he'd heard Caldwell's real plan discussed among the man's associates. "He means to buy the place, all right," Josiah reported, "but not to expand it, to shut it down, show folks that these experiments always fail, always end up costing more than they're worth. He'd destroy everything Mother worked for. Worse, he'd use the failure to argue that slavery is natural, necessary, the best arrangement for everyone involved. Your success threatens his worldview, so he aims to purchase that threat and eliminate it." The confrontation came the next morning. Caldwell arrived early, contract in hand, expecting signatures and gratitude. Instead, he found the entire community gathered on the front lawn, every family, every worker, every student from the school. "We decline your offer," Elias announced. "Decline?" Caldwell's composure slipped slightly. "But the terms are extraordinarily generous. The terms are irrelevant," Miriam interrupted. "This isn't about money. It's about home." "Home?" Caldwell's laugh held nervous edge. "You call this home? This collection of former slaves and guilty whites playing at social reform?" Lila stepped forward, her small voice carrying clearly in the morning air. "Yes, sir, we call it home, because home isn't about who owns what. It's about who stands with who when troubles come. Child, you don't understand the complexities. I understand that you came here with lies dressed up as kindness. I understand that you think we're too simple to see through your pretty words to your ugly plans." Lila's dark eyes blazed with inherited fire. "And I understand that Miss Margaret would laugh at the notion that her dream could be bought and sold like cotton futures." Caldwell's mask finally slipped completely. "You people have no idea what you're playing with. This fantasy of yours will collapse within a year. These freed slaves will steal you blind, abandon you at the first hardship, prove themselves incapable of real freedom." "Maybe," Thomas Carter said, stepping forward with his son. "But it will be our collapse, our mistake to make, our choice to stand or fall by our principles instead of our prejudices. And if you're wrong, if this grand experiment destroys everything your family built, then we'll have destroyed it for something better than what we inherited," Elias replied. "And that's a trade we're willing to make." Caldwell stared at them for a long moment, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and finally, a kind of grudging respect. "You're all fools," he said at last, "but perhaps the world needs a few more fools like you." He mounted his carriage and rode away without looking back. None of them ever saw him again, though they heard later that he'd invested his money in a cotton plantation that failed spectacularly within 2 years. "Reckon we passed the test," Josiah observed. "Reckon we did," Lila agreed. "But there'll be more tests coming. There always are, when you choose love over law." 5 years later, the Carter place had become something unprecedented in the antebellum South, a thriving community of free families working together by choice rather than compulsion. The school had grown to serve children from 3 counties. The farm produced enough to support its residents and sell surplus at competitive prices. Most remarkably, not a single family had chosen to leave. The transformation hadn't been without costs. The local bank had foreclosed on the original mortgage when Thomas Carter refused to use human beings as collateral for new loans. They'd had to rebuild their finances from nothing, acre by acre and crop by crop. Several neighboring planters had organized boycotts of their products. Politicians in Colombia had passed laws making their arrangements technically illegal, though enforcement proved impossible when no one would testify against them. Most painful of all, some of their own family members had cut ties completely. Distant cousins refused to acknowledge them. Old friends crossed the street to avoid speaking. Even some of the freed families struggled with the adjustment from bondage to freedom, finding choice more difficult than obedience. But the joys far outweighed the sorrows. Lila, now 12, had become a local celebrity for her teaching abilities and perfect memory. Students came from as far as Virginia to learn from the child who could recite entire books after hearing them once. Miriam and Elias had welcomed their first child the previous spring, a daughter they named Margaret, whose first lullabies were the freedom hymns her Aunt Leela hummed while weaving ribbons through her dark hair. Thomas Carter had found a kind of peace he'd never thought possible, working alongside men he'd once owned and discovering that friendship was more satisfying than dominance. "Do you ever regret it?" a visitor asked him one evening. "Giving up your position, your wealth, your standing in society?" "Every day," the old man replied honestly. "And every day, I'm grateful I had the chance to make a different choice." The visitor, a journalist from a northern newspaper, scribbled notes furiously. "And what do you think your late wife would say about what you've accomplished here?" Before Thomas could answer, Lila appeared at his elbow, now tall enough to reach his shoulder. "I can tell you exactly what she'd say," the girl offered. "You can?" "She'd say, 'The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice.' Then she'd quote some Bible verse about faith being the substance of things hoped for. Then she'd probably cry a little, because that's what she did when she was happy proud instead of sad proud." The journalist looked puzzled. Happy proud versus sad proud. Happy proud is when you're proud because something good happened. Sad proud is when you're proud because someone did right, even though it cost them dear. Lila considered this distinction with the seriousness she brought to all matters of importance. Miss Margaret spent most of her life sad proud, but I think now she'd be happy proud. "You speak of her as if you knew her well." "I did know her well. Better than most. Maybe, because I remember everything she ever said to me, everything she ever sang, every prayer she ever whispered when she thought nobody was listening. And what did those prayers tell you about her?" Lila's eyes grew soft with memory. "They told me she believed love was stronger than law, mercy greater than money, and hope more powerful than habit. They told me she dreamed of a world where all God's children got to choose their own path, whatever color their skin happened to be." "And do you think such a world is possible?" "I think it's coming. Maybe not fast, maybe not easy, but coming all the same." Lila touched the faded blue ribbon she still wore around her wrist. "Because some dreams are too true to die, even when the dreamers do." The porch light burned steady in the evening darkness, casting its glow across the front steps where 3 generations sat together in comfortable quiet. Little Margaret slept in her mother's arms, while Lila read aloud from a letter that had arrived that morning. "Dear friends," she read, "your story has reached our community in Ohio, where we are attempting a similar experiment in cooperative farming. We would be grateful for any advice you might offer about the transition from bondage to freedom, both for the families involved and the wider community." "How many letters like that have we received now?" Elias asked. 47, Lila replied without hesitation, "from 12 different states and 1 from Canada. Folks are hungry for proof that change is possible." Thomas Carter rocked slowly in his chair, his weathered face peaceful in the lamplight. Margaret would be amazed to know how far her small act of conscience has reached. Small? Miriam shifted baby Margaret to her shoulder. There was nothing small about it. She gave up everything she'd been taught to believe, everything her society expected of her, everything that would have been safe and easy. But she started with just 1 paper, the old man pointed out. 1 signature, 1 seal, 1 moment of choosing right over convenient. "Sometimes that's all it takes," Lila said. 1 person willing to step out of line, 1 voice willing to speak truth, 1 heart willing to break tradition for the sake of justice. The baby stirred, making soft sounds that weren't quite words yet. Lila leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "What story should I tell you tonight, little Margaret? The one about how your grandmother hid freedom in a quilt? The one about how your mama sang her way across a storm? Or maybe the one about how love can change the world, 1 choice at a time?" "Tell her about the ribbon," Miriam suggested. "Tell her why we keep it and what it means." Lila untied the faded blue strip from her wrist and held it up to catch the porch light. Though worn thin by years of wear, it still held its color, still carried the memory of that first morning in the kitchen when everything began to change. "This ribbon belonged to your daddy first," she whispered to the baby. "He gave it to your mama as a promise, back when promises between them were dangerous things. Then it became a marker of freedom, tied around the papers that made us all legally free. Then it became a symbol of family, binding us together through good times and hard ones." She tied the ribbon gently around the baby's tiny wrist. "Now it's yours, little one. A reminder that freedom isn't something you're given, it's something you choose, over and over, every day of your life." The baby's fingers closed around the ribbon as if she understood its significance. In the distance, a church bell tolled 9 o'clock, and somewhere in the quarters someone began singing a hymn. "Listen," Lila said, her own voice joining the melody. "That's the sound of folks who are free to sing their own songs, dream their own dreams, choose their own tomorrow." The music rose and fell like gentle waves, carrying on the night air the hopes and struggles of people learning to be fully human. It was a sound Margaret Carter had dreamed of, but never lived to hear the sound of chains breaking, not with violence but with love. And on the porch of the old plantation house, 3 generations sat together in the glow of freedom's light, watching the stars wheel overhead and knowing that morning would bring new chances to choose love over law, mercy over money, hope over habit. The ribbon fluttered gently in the evening breeze, a small blue banner of victory in a war that was far from over but no longer hopeless. Sometimes the longest journeys begin with the smallest steps, and the greatest revolutions start with a single act of conscience, carried forward by the perfect memory of love.